Hi there. So if you're like me and you're a teacher, most of your experience with generative AI and ChatGPT so far has been pretty negative. And that's been because of cheating, students using it to complete assignments they should be completing on their own. Lots of situations where you're pretty sure they're using ChatGPT, but it's hard to prove and it's just kind of making your life miserable. This video is meant to talk about another use of ChatGPT, where it can actually be used to assist your teaching, to make you a better teacher, to give your students a better educational experience. I have a YouTube channel. I've done a bunch of little videos sort of showing some of the things I've been learning with ChatGPT. This is one longer video where I'm trying to sort of pull together everything that I've learned about using ChatGPT from a teaching perspective and how you can use tools in ChatGPT to provide your students with a better educational experience. A little bit about me. I am an instructor at Kwantlen Polytechnic University, which is in Surrey, British Columbia, which is a suburb of Vancouver. I've been teaching there in some form or another for about 20 years. I teach data visualization, I teach journalism, and I've been kind of obsessed with ChatGPT and generative AI over the past year. And Kwantlen, luckily, is an institution that's been taking AI really seriously. How do we prepare our students for AI? And they were generous enough to give me what's called a course release this semester, where basically I get a break from teaching one of my courses, and I was allowed to really dive deep into ChatGPT and some of its applications for teaching. If you follow my YouTube channel, I have already produced a lot of videos about ChatGPT and generative AI already, some of them to do with using it for data analysis and data visualization, some others, different techniques and tricks that I've come across. The goal of this video is to sort of have one longer video that really tries to pull together everything that I've learned over the last year about using ChatGPT in teaching, and how you can use it to make your experience for your students better. One of the terms that's sometimes been used in describing ChatGPT and similar tools like it is infinite interns. This idea that, it's not perfect as a tool, but it creates this sort of like endless resource of little robots that you can send off to do your bidding. I think as a teacher, it's sometimes helpful to think about ChatGPT as infinite teaching assistants, infinite TAs. And it allows you to kind of think about, I'm only one teacher. I can't provide all of my students with 100% attention, everything they could possibly want. But if I had an army of TAs, if the university was willing to write me an endless budget for as many TAs that I wanted, what would I do? Well, maybe I'd have someone on call all the time. Students can call, at midnight on a Saturday night if they need to help them understand a particular concept in class or to give them advice about how to think about an assignment. Maybe I would have a little room where students could stop by any time and get quizzed on the latest class content to help prepare them for tests and exams and just give them more confidence that they actually understand the material. And it's with that approach that I've been playing around with a particular function of ChatGPT known as custom GPTs or just GPTs to basically produce two little, I call them bots. One is a tutor bot that can help students to understand course content and answer their questions about the course. And the other is a quiz bot that will quiz students on what they've learned in the class so far and help them prepare for tests and understand the course material a little bit better. And I'm going to walk you through how to produce both of those in ChatGPT. I'll also be putting in the description area of the video my actual full prompt language so that you can use that as a template. And in my view, actually pretty quickly set up your own tutor bot, your own quiz bot to help your students understand course material. So to get started, the first thing we need to talk about is custom GPTs. So what is a custom GPT? A custom GPT is basically a special version of ChatGPT that's designed to accomplish a particular task. If you've played around with ChatGPT at all, you can give it very detailed instructions about what you want it to do and things like that. And sometimes you're wanting to achieve the same kind of task over and over again, and it can get a bit repetitive if every single time you need to explain everything that you want ChatGPT to do. The idea of a custom GPT is you can kind of create kind of a baseline prompt that like every time you interact with this custom GPT, do this. And then the other key thing is that you can upload particular documents that you want it to rely on, or other files actually, that you want it to rely on in answering questions or achieving particular tasks. Now, this is one thing that you can only create GPTs if you have the paid version of ChatGPT, which is ChatGPT Plus. I believe is about $20 US, I think $30 Canadian, though you can use GPTs even on the free version of ChatGPT, although you can't use them for very long. If you're in ChatGPT, you want to go over here to explore GPTs. And you'll actually see there's a lot of GPTs that you can play around with. Some of the more popular ones are ones that will particularly search for scholarly articles and summarize peer-reviewed research, which obviously can be helpful if you're a professor or you're doing research and things like that. There's other just goofy ones that'll help you make coloring books for your kids or make logos for your company and stuff like that. And they're all kind of designed to narrow down what ChatGPT is doing. But what we're doing, and what you can do if you have a free version of ChatGPT, is you can create your own custom GPT right here using the Create button. And when you press that Create button, you'll be taken to a screen usually that looks like this, where you're actually having a chat with ChatGPT about how to create your custom GPT. And it's very inviting. It says, what would you like to make? And you could sort of say like, I would like to make a custom GPT that can act as a tutor for students in my class, right? And then it'll think a little bit. It'll say it's updating. You'll see this little gear icon. And then it starts building some possible things. It says, what do you want to call it? Do you want to call it Classroom Coach? Say that's fine. And it kind of walks you through this discussion about how to produce your GPT. One of the first things it does is it creates a cute little photo using its image generator to make the image. And you can tell it, I like that image. And then it continues to sort of walk you through this process of creating your custom GPT. And it says, you can start playing around with it, and it all looks really good. One of the first things I discovered about custom GPTs is this is a mistake. This seems like the easiest, most intuitive way to create your custom GPT because you're just having a chat with ChatGPT the way you're used to doing, but it's actually very dangerous. It actually is going to make it more frustrating, more difficult for you to achieve what it is you want to achieve with your custom GPT and creating tutor bots and quiz bots. So my number one advice, and I actually covered this in another video that I made, when you're making custom GPTs for any purpose, but especially for teaching, is don't create, configure. So what's the difference? In the configure window, you can see this looks a little bit more kind of structured. You've got an image of the custom GPT at the top. You've got a name for it. You've got a description. You've got these conversation starters, which is sort of, 3 or 4 things that will appear at the top that you can access. And then you've got this instruction box here. And this is the part that is kind of weird. So what happens is when you use the create window, right? Like maybe I say something like, this is for a course on data visualization at Kwantlen Polytechnic University in Surrey, BC. And it does that little sort of thinking gear icon. What it's actually doing is it's taking your input from this sort of chat window and it's basically interpreting it for the configure window, okay? And that configure instructions right here, the best way to think about this is this would be like the first instruction. If you weren't using a custom GPT or just using plain vanilla GPT, this is what you would tell it about how you want it to behave. And when the custom GPT is working, this is kind of like the baseline instructions that it is going to operate under before your student asks the very first question, right? Now, the problem is there's kind of a level of abstraction here where it's taking your kind of instructions here and it's trying to translate them into prompting language, right? And sometimes it does a good job of that and sometimes it doesn't. And in fact, I can already see here, right? It says this GPT is designed to act as a supportive and knowledgeable tutor for students enrolled in a data visualization course at Kwantlen Polytechnic University in Surrey, BC. It provides clear, friendly, and accurate explanations on topics such as chart types, data storytelling, visualization tools, and then it says examples Tableau and D3. Okay, I didn't mention Tableau. I didn't mention D3, right? And in fact, because data visualization is my area, D3 is an incredibly complicated coding language I would never inflict on my first year students, right? So already it's kind of drifting from what I want it to do, right? Because it's sort of making assumptions based on its knowledge based and all that kind of stuff about what you want it to do. It's actually adding a lot of stuff here about how it should behave. Like it's making assumptions about, what a tutor bot should do and all that kind of stuff, which, all I've really said, like I've given it like 3 sentences, right? Like I want a custom GPT for data visualization, and it's come up with all of this, right? Now, in some ways that's helpful, right? Because maybe you haven't really thought about how a tutor bot should behave, but in other ways it's very dangerous because it's kind of guessing what you want it to do. So it's not a bad idea to throw in a few little initial ideas of what you want to do, just because, getting used to prompting language can be a little bit tricky. But then very quickly you want to be kind of working directly on the GPT and make your changes in configure, right? And so here, like I would sort of say visualization tools, I would say Tableau, and the tool that I use is Data Wrapper, right? And you can start editing the instructions here to be exactly what it is you want to do. The other nice thing is, because this is actually how the custom GPT works, once you get prompting language that you're happy with, that's working well, if I want to create a new custom GPT for another class that basically is going to function in the same way, I can just copy this prompting language and pop it into the instruction box on another GPT, and it'll function essentially the same way. And as I mentioned, I'm going to put my prompting language for my TutorBot and QuizBot in the description. So for you to get started, I would just start with that. I would just copy and paste that into the instruction window and then update it and edit it as needed for what you want your class TutorBot to do. But you're much better working in the configure window rather than the create window, because you're going to get much better results and you're going to have a lot more control over how your GPT functions. And in particular, when your GPT is not working the way that you want it to, I found that editing and making changes in the instruction box is much more effective than kind of telling it to change something here. Like, so for example, I could say something like, I notice, what did I say here? I notice, we don't use Tableau in my class. Right? Then it's going to have to try to go into the instruction window, edit it, make things. And is it going to take the word Tableau just out of it? Or is it going to add a whole extra line, about Tableau, right? You're kind of guessing. And in fact, it looks like it didn't get rid of Tableau at all, right? So there's just weirdness about, how it does things. Oh, actually here it changed it to excluding Tableau, right? So, better to work directly in the configure window. Okay, so I'm going to get more into prompting in a second, but the other really key thing about custom GPTs is the knowledge base, right? So the ability to upload course documents, textbooks, things like that, that the GPT is going to use when it answers questions, when it quizzes students on the content. Like the idea here is we want this GPT not just to be generally talking about the topic that you talk about in your class, but to be really tightly anchored to how you teach the course, the textbooks, the handouts, the readings that you give the students. And so if we scroll down here, and again, you can do this in the create window because you can upload documents, but again, it's much better just to go down to the configure window, down here at the bottom where it says knowledge, and you can just upload files from your class here. So a little word here about the files that you may want to upload. In my classes, I don't use textbooks. I use handouts. I just sort of create my own handouts, and they sort of explain what I talk about in class. So they're mine. I can do with what I want, and so I just upload my handouts here. Quantlin is actually a big advocate of open education, trying to reduce textbook costs. So we've been using a lot of open education textbooks. So let's show you some examples here. So these are free textbooks that are available on lots of different topics. And so, in this case, they're, usually Creative Commons license, things like that. You might want to check with the author of the textbook, but generally speaking, there aren't the same copyright issues. There obviously would be much bigger copyright issues if you had a textbook that was published by a publisher. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to advise you on how to do that. All I would say is, if you're in that situation, there's a technical fact that you might not have a PDF or electronic copy of the textbook. The other one is it's a little bit more dicey. Can you upload that textbook to ChatGPT? Would that be a copyright violation? So my advice here is best for people that are using open education textbooks, or where you have your own course materials. And that could be handouts. It could also be if you had detailed lecture notes. It could be PowerPoint slides. One thing I've discovered with custom GPTs, it's very, very good at understanding the text of course materials, not so good images. So, if what you're teaching involves a lot of complex diagrams, it may not work very well. But if mainly what you're going to get from your PowerPoint slides is your narration or the text that's on the slide, it could work quite well. But that's just some things to think about. But the main takeaway here is you can then upload those files to the knowledge base. So, I can go find my handouts, and I can just upload a bunch of them here. Okay, so there's one big caveat though when it comes to uploading course materials to your knowledge base for a custom GPT, and that is if you keep on uploading documents, and I have about 35 handouts, you're eventually going to get this error. It's going to say error saving draft, and it's going to say cannot upload more than 20 files. So this is actually an improvement over the way it used to be. It used to just say error and you didn't even know what the error was, but there is a limit on custom GPTs that you can only upload 20 files. And obviously, in a lot of classes, you would have more than 20 files, right? Either a lot of handouts or a lot of different lecture notes for individual lectures. There is, though, a relatively easy way around this, because while you can only upload 20 files, those files can be huge. I don't have the documentation in front of me. I think it's something like each file can be like 500 megabytes. So the answer is just to combine them, right? So you could just do this in a sort of quick and dirty way. Like if I've got all these PDF handouts, I could get one of these programs that just compresses them all into one PDF. But it is often helpful for the custom GPT to have a sense of these are separate documents. These are separate handouts. This is the syllabus. This is the assignment page. And so what I did is I took all of my individual handouts and I put them into a Word document. So I just copied and pasted all the individual handouts into a Word document, right? One huge Word document. It's probably about 300 pages long. And then when I came across the title of each handout, I formatted that as a heading. And when you do that, it then allows you to insert a table of contents, right? So you can go over here to table of contents, and you can create a custom table of contents. And what that just does is it just creates this little, very basic, this is nothing fancy, table of contents at the top that lists the headers for all of the individual handouts. And then, if you want to do this, you can click on one of those headers and it takes you to the handout. And then I just uploaded this one huge Word document to ChatGPT. And what I found is the structure of this Word document seemed to be helpful, and it seemed to work better than if I didn't have this table of contents. If I just dumped all of the handouts into one Word document or created one massive PDF file, because it was able to understand, it seemed that these are individual handouts or sections of the course materials. I think it's possible that the titles on the table of contents helped it when it was searching documents. But regardless, it's a way to get around this problem of only being able to upload 20 files. You can have really, really big files that contain an enormous amount of information. So I want to add one quick note about PDFs. So when people talk about PDFs, there's actually two different types of PDFs. There are PDFs that are text-based. These are ones that are often exported from like Word, or if you find an open education textbook, it's almost always going to be text-based. But then some are scanned. They're based on scanned documents. The way to test this out is to open your PDF in Adobe or in Mac Preview and just see if you can do a Control F and look for words in the document. If you can't, it's going to be a scanned document. And in my experience, custom GPTs work very, very poorly with scanned documents. ChatGPT, generally speaking, does seem to have the ability to look at an image and infer the text from it. But that's kind of on a one-off basis when you're giving it like one picture. If you're giving it hundreds of pages of course materials, if you're giving it an entire textbook, The custom GPT doesn't seem to be able to properly understand that in any meaningful way if that document is just a scan of hundreds of pages. And in fact, sometimes it'll even give you error messages if you try to upload a scanned PDF. The workaround for this is there are actually a lot of decent tools online that can take a scanned PDF and can do optical character recognition on it, OCR. If you Google PDF OCR, actually one of the top non-sponsored results that you get and that I found really good is PDF 24's OCR tool, where you can just upload a PDF file, tell it what language it's in, and it does a pretty good job of doing OCR on it. It's not perfect, but it gets you to a place where it's pretty decent. And then you download that PDF, and the PDF has the text in it, and you can upload that to ChatGPT. So if you are in a weird situation where you've got some decent course materials, but they're scanned documents, I would OCR them first before you try to upload them to your custom GPT. So in my experience playing around with custom GPTs over the past several months and also reading other people's experience using custom GPTs, the number one frustration people have by a country mile is that the custom GPT does not base its responses on the uploaded documents, right? ChatGPT has been trained on basically the entire internet. ChatGPT knows a lot about everything. And I find very often with custom GPTs, it gets a bit lazy and it's like, I know the answer to this question. I don't need to look at the course materials. I'm just going to wing it, right? And in some cases that's okay, but if that's all that the custom GPT is doing, why are you even building a custom GPT? If the answers that it's giving are the same as plain vanilla ChatGPT would give, why are you using a custom GPT at all, right? Why are you building a tutor bot for your students? More specifically, very often that's a bad thing for your students because there might be ways that you teach things that are actually different than the general accepted knowledge on that topic. Or, and I think this is probably even more common, what you're teaching is more narrow or more localized, right? If you're teaching nursing in British Columbia, there are particular regulations and rules about nursing for British Columbia, Canada, which are different than they are in the United States, that are different than they are in the United Kingdom. And so if you're asking about, what are the rules around medication dosage, plain vanilla ChatGPT might give you a very generic answer, which could actually be wrong for your particular students. And one of the other frustrating things about building custom GPTs is that giving ChatGPT instructions is a weird art. It is not a science. You might think if I tell ChatGPT to do something, it will do it. No, I spent months having custom GPTs saying, make sure that your answers are based on the course materials, and it would just ignore it, and it would give me a generic answer instead. And so there's a lot of trial and error of trying to find the right language that will actually get ChatGPT to do what you want it to do. And that's why in the details, the description for this video, I'm sharing my prompting language because it's the result of several months of trial and error. And rather than starting from scratch, I would just take that language. And I'll actually show you the language for my current tutor bot in my data visualization class. And again, I'll share this in the description text for this video, but I wanted to highlight a few key things. So the first is that in my experience, and it's hard to get a 100% read on this, but this seems to work better, is that the second person seems to work well for ChatGPT. So rather than saying this is a tutor bot, you say you are a tutor bot designed to assist students in the JRNL 3165 data visualization course at Kwantlen Polytechnic University in Surrey, BC. I find right off the bat sort of giving it a role seems to work quite well. It sort of understands what it's supposed to do. And then you'll see here a lot of my prompt is actually almost hectoring ChatGPT to make sure that it uses the source documents, because this was the number one problem I was having, and just telling it once to do it didn't seem to be working. So this language seems to really help. Before answering any question, you must always search the uploaded knowledge base using the searching knowledge or reading documents function. Do not answer any question unless this step has been taken. Even if you believe you already know the answer, you are not allowed to infer, summarize, or quote unless the source is confirmed through this method. And in fact, and some of this is sort of just left over from earlier attempts that didn't work, there's even more kind of like, I really mean it. Do not do that, right? This one is a little bit weirder. So this originally stemmed from, I'm wanting this tutor bot to assist my students, but I don't want it to replace the course materials. So, you know, in addition to just answering the questions that the student has, I also want it to say where the answers are coming from, right? So if you want more information, check out this handout, right? So I have this section of the instructions that says at the end of every response, you must make two statements. The first, quote, for more information, see section X of the course materials. X should only refer to a section heading in the table of contents and nothing else like a subheading. Second, quote, if my response didn't say searching knowledge or reading documents before replying, please remind me to do so. Sometimes I forget and then my answers aren't as good. So this came from the fact that I was having so many frustrations where sometimes it would search the knowledge, sometimes it wouldn't. And this was almost like a hacky fix where it was like, well, maybe if the students noticed that it didn't search the documents, it can tell it to. And then sometimes actually that would work. If the student said, or the user said, you know, make sure you search your documents, it would give a better answer after that. But weirdly, I actually think this section helped with the more fundamental problem of searching the knowledge. What I discovered is once I added this kind of tell me where it's coming from and tell the student to remind you to do this, it almost, you know, in a backhanded way, forced it to more reliably search its knowledge base. And I think the reason for that is that, you know, and I'm making a whole bunch of guesses here about how this unknown technology works, is that if it knows at the end of its response it's going to have to say where it got the information from, then it needs to search the documents to know where the information came from, because otherwise, if it's just basing it on its general knowledge base, it's not able to do that. So I think this can be helpful to your students anyways, but it actually does seem to help solve that problem of searching for knowledge. And so this is the TutorBot in my data visualization class as I have it working right now. You can see it's got a description at the top. I think it's helpful, especially in these early stages of this technology, to be explicit with students that, you know, this is still in testing mode, double check things, you know, tell your students to reach out to you if they have good or bad experiences with it, so you can kind of keep an eye on how things are working. And then you have these pre-built questions, so you can have 3 or 4 or more questions that are kind of always there, which I think is sometimes helpful for students to sort of get used to using this rather than having to come up with a question with just a blank screen. And you can obviously base these questions on the kind of questions that you think your students might often have, right? So in my situation, a lot of my students use the Statistics Canada website to find data sets. And one of the things that can be a little bit complicated when using the StatsCan website is how to download data, right? Because if you're on the dataset page, I'll just show you what this looks like. You have this download options, and the download options are really confusing, right? So it's like, do you want to download cube metadata information? Do you want to download as displayed? Do you want to download selected data for database loading? And this is something that I cover in my course, right? Which of these options you should choose and why. And so one of the pre-built questions I have here is which download option is best for StatsCan data? And if I do that, you'll see here, it says searching my knowledge. Now, weirdly on the iOS app, it says reading documents for some reason. I don't know why it's not the same, but you can see it's searching my knowledge. That's what you want to see. That's the, if it's not doing that, your custom GPT is not working the way that it should. You want it to always basically be searching the knowledge for every single question, because the whole point of your custom GPT is to base its responses on the course material. And you can see here that when it does that, it gives a very detailed, very specific advice. And this is basically exactly what I tell my students, that the 2 options that you want to choose out of these, you know, half dozen possibilities are either download as displayed or download selected data for database loading. And it explains, you know, what the advantages and disadvantages are. In some situations, you might just want the first. In many situations, you want the second. And then it tells me at the end, you know, for more information, see the section data cleaning and analysis and all that kind of stuff, right? Now, this is the situation where as you start to play around with your custom GPT and you're trying to figure out, you know, is this working? Is this helpful for my students? The key thing you want to be doing is looking for questions where the answer that your custom GPT is giving you is very different than the answer that plain vanilla ChatGPT is giving you. Because the whole idea here is that I want them to use my custom bot so that they get a really good answer to this question that is based on what I teach in the class. All my students probably know how to use basic ChatGPT already. If the answer to this question is the same as what they would get from just regular ChatGPT, what's the point, right? So I'm just going to show you what it's like to ask this question of regular ChatGPT so you have an idea. And in this case, it searches the web to try to find an answer. And it gives a general thing that, you should maybe use CSV or tab delimited text or this weird format called IVT, right? And this isn't bad advice, right? It's advice based on what it was able to find online, but it's not very helpful for my students. It's talking about download formats that we never talk about in class, like IVT. So it's not as good of a response as what I'm getting from my custom GPT. Now, as you go about testing your custom GPT, one of the tricky things is that it's very hard to get a sense of what plain ChatGPT looks like. And the reason for that is one of the things that OpenAI has really been developing more recently is trying to get ChatGPT to know more about you, right? So that when you ask it a question, it's not treating every chat as if it's a brand new thing and it doesn't know who you are, that it looks at your previous chats, it tries to put those in context. And this is a very helpful feature for people that are using ChatGPT, because if you're always using ChatGPT to help you come up with marketing materials in an advertising agency, when you ask it a question, it's helpful if it knows that this question is probably in the context of, this person working in advertising rather than taking it blind. But for the purposes of testing ChatGPT and seeing how it's performing compared to your custom GPT, this is a bit of a nightmare precisely because of all the things that you do with ChatGPT, including building your custom GPT. ChatGPT already knows a lot about you. It can infer certain things about where you are, what topics you're interested in, things like that. So there's two ways to get around this. One is ChatGPT now has this kind of like temporary chat. It's kind of like the incognito browser of ChatGPT. And when you turn on the temporary chat, the chat will not appear in your history. It won't use your memory to help answer the questions. And it sort of allows you to kind of see what plain GPT looks like. This is similar to like if you've ever done anything in search engine optimization or you're playing around with Google, it's often very good to open an incognito window in Chrome and Google something there, because otherwise Google knows a lot about you. So I think this temporary chat mainly exists for people that want to ask ChatGPT things that they might be embarrassed to have show up in their history, like I've got this weird, growth on my hand or something like that. But for our purposes, it really is helpful from a training perspective, because it allows us to see what the closest thing to kind of plain GPT would look like, right? And so if I ask that, which download option is best for StatsCan data, I get the generic answer, which in this case is probably going to be pretty similar, but in some cases might be quite different, right? So this is the best way to test it. The other thing you can do, and I'm going to talk about the value of this later on, is even if you have a paid version of ChatGPT, using another email address, create a free version of ChatGPT and use that for kind of testing purposes, which will help give you a better idea of, what's the experience going to be like for my students that are probably just using the free version of ChatGPT. And I'll give you another example here. I could ask plain vanilla ChatGPT, what are the advantages and disadvantages of different data visualization tools? And it talks about Tableau as the first one. And it talks about Power BI, which is Microsoft's Tableau competitor. Then it talks about Google Data Studio, and then Microsoft Excel. Okay. Now, of these four, I only use one, Tableau, in my data visualization class, right? So this is a very unhelpful answer for the students in my class, right? So let's ask that same question of my tutor bot. What are the advantages and disadvantages of different data visualization tools? We see that searching my knowledge, that's the key thing you should always be looking for. And it zeroes in on the two tools that I use in that class, right? These are the only data visualization tools. I actually don't teach my students how to visualize in Excel because I think their charts look awful. So it talks about the very specific advantages and disadvantages of Data Wrapper and Tableau Public, which are the two tools that I teach my students, right? So as you are playing around with your custom GPT, tweaking the instructions, this is going to be the way that you kind of get a sense of whether things are working or not, right? Is to find 2 or 3 or 4 questions where the answer that plain vanilla ChatGPT will give is very different than the answer that you want your students to receive. And how good of a job your custom GPT does of really anchoring its responses in your course materials will give you a good idea of how well your prompts are working, right? And generally speaking, if you see that searching my knowledge, you're in good hands. Like then things are going to work pretty well. If you don't, then you know you're kind of off into just generic ChatGPT land, and you're going to need to figure out a way to make your prompting language a little bit stronger, make it a little bit clearer to ChatGPT that you always absolutely want it to search the course materials before it answers a question. Down at the bottom of the configure page in ChatGPT, you'll notice these capabilities. So this is the different functionalities that ChatGPT has, and you can turn them on or off, right? So one is the ability to search the web. One is called Canvas. This is sort of something that people often use when they're coding. It kind of creates a separate window where the code or the document is, and then it kind of works on the editing of it. Image generation, and then code interpreter and data analysis. For the purposes of tutor bots, I recommend turning all of these off, right? You don't generally need, unless you're in a very odd course, ChatGPT to create images for you. You don't usually want it to be like producing assignments for your students. So you probably don't want it to have a canvas where it can kind of write out things. You just want it to be able to answer questions. And web search in particular, if the whole idea is I want your answers to be based on the course materials, turning off web search just prevents another temptation for ChatGPT to use something other than your course materials to answer questions. So I would turn all of these off for the tutor bot. As we'll get to in a second, when you're doing a quiz bot, you may want to keep one of them on, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. By default, your ChatGPT will be saved here. The very first time you do it, you'll have to click on the create button. I'll walk you through that in a second. You'll also see this edited box here that says when your custom GPT was last edited. And if you clear on that, you can actually see a version history for your custom GPT. So when it was last edited and how it has changed. You can actually click on an earlier version, and you can click on compare changes, and you can see how your bot has changed, what documents have maybe been added or removed since the last time, what conversation starters have been changed, things like that. This is less helpful than you would think because it sort of just highlights the fact that the instructions have changed, but you can't really see how they've changed. If you're trying to kind of remind yourself, what have I changed since, the version of this that I had a month ago, I would actually use a difference checker website. I use one called diffchecker.com. And what you can do in that case is just copy and paste the old instructions into the left box, copy and paste the right instructions into the right box, and then just compare how they've changed. And you'll sort of see the areas that are highlighted in green are the things that have been added, the things in red are things that have been removed. And so if you just sort of need a refresher on how your instructions have changed over time, sometimes what can happen is you kind of make so many changes to your instructions, you actually realize you've gone too far in the other direction. You want to kind of pull it back a little bit. So this can be helpful to kind of keep track of how things are changing over time. So once you're happy with how your custom GPT is performing, it's time to publish it. And you do that by clicking on the Create button in the top right-hand corner, like so. And then you have a choice. So there are 3 privacy modes for your custom GPT. The first is that only you will have access to it. So this could be helpful, not so much for a tutor bot or a quiz bot, obviously, but if you're playing around with something and you want a custom GPT to help you with it and only you want to use it, then obviously the only me is the right option. The most extreme option is to add it to the GPT store. And that means it will show up for other people anywhere in the world who use ChatGPT to access. It'll be searchable. And if you're wanting to create something that you think will have broader appeal or broader use, then that's great. But for most educational approaches, the middle ground is going to be the right one, which is that anyone with the link can access it, but it's not going to show up on a Google search. It's not going to show up on the ChatGPT store. You're producing this for your students in your class. You only want them to have access to it. So anyone with the link is usually the option you're going to want for educational custom GPTs. You can click save, and then it will give you a link that you can share with your students. You can put a link to this on your course website, and students will be able to access it with a free account of ChatGPT. And you can actually see that if I go into an incognito window here, it will come up and anyone can log in to ChatGPT and use it. You do need a ChatGPT account to use custom GPTs, but you can access them with the free version of ChatGPT. So in addition to the Tutor bot, the other thing I've been experimenting with, and I think has been quite helpful for my students, is a quiz bot that quizzes them on the course material so far and helps them prepare for tests and exams and things like that, and also just gives them a good sense of how they're understanding the course material, if they understand the course material properly. In a lot of ways, this looks similar to the Tutor bot in that the main thing you're going to want to do is to upload your course materials, which could be in the form of a textbook. It could be in the form of course handouts, lecture notes, PowerPoint presentations. I did this the exact same way I did with my Tutor bot, where I pasted all of the individual handouts for my course into a Word document, made each title of the handouts a header in Microsoft Word, and then created a table of contents, which you can do from the references pane in Microsoft Word. So that step's exactly the same. And again, that gets around the problem of being limited to only uploading 20 documents. But then the challenging thing that I found, well, there are two challenging things with the quiz bot. One of them was I obviously only wanted to quiz students on what they'd already learned, right? So, if it's the fourth week of class, and I'm asking them questions about something we don't cover until the 10th or the 11th week, that's kind of confusing. And so I needed something that kind of would help the custom GPT to understand where are we at in the course so far. And so what I did is I uploaded, in addition to the course handouts, a copy of the syllabus. And the crucial part of that syllabus and what you need for this to work is something in the syllabus that says, this is what we're covering every week. And obviously, if you're a teacher, this is not going to be exact, but at least it's getting you somewhere close to letting the custom GPT know, this is what we covered this week, this is what we covered this week, this is what we covered this week. And then in the instruction set that I gave the custom GPT, I made it very clear that I only wanted it to quiz the student on what had been covered so far. And so again, I will paste the entire prompt into the description, but just so you have a sense, I wanted to focus on a few key things. Again, like we did before, you want to sort of tell the custom GPT what your role is. You are the JRNL 1220 quiz bot. GPT designed to help quiz students in the citizen journalism course at Kwantlen Polytechnic University. Citizen journalism is kind of a research-focused course, how to find things out. And this was the part where I basically got it to leverage the syllabus to be able to only ask questions of things that the students should know by that point. So you'll begin every conversation the same way, state today's date, and ChatGPT seems to be able to figure out what today's date is. Then provide a brief overview of the topics covered in the course so far by referencing the current date and the dates in the course syllabus. Then provide the student with three options. Just quiz me on material for the past 3 weeks. This is best for preparing for quizzes. Quiz me on everything we've covered in the course so far. So do this a few times a semester to prepare for the final test. Or quiz me on a specific topic of my choice. So I really want to be quizzed on freedom of information requests or court searches or property searches. So that was step one. Step two, which was something that it took me quite a while to figure out, was when I first started working with this quiz bot, it was working pretty well, but then I noticed that I would start a new conversation. I would ask it to give me 5 questions. I would start a new conversation. I would ask it to give me 5 questions, and it would often ask me the same 5 questions, sometimes slightly different, but annoyingly consistently the same 4, 5, 6 questions on the same topic areas, ignoring whole other areas of the course materials. I tried to fix this by adding some language in my prompt instructions that said, pick the topics at random, right? So you're asking students something a little bit different. That seemed to help a little bit, but not as much as it should. And one of the things I've discovered about ChatGPT is that it's not very good with randomness, right? So if you ask ChatGPT, give me a random number between 1 and 10, most times it'll say 7, right? Because it's training material. When people talk about random numbers, they talk about 7. So it's actually not very good at intuiting what randomization is, and it can often make things that look random, but they're not really. And that was a big problem because obviously, if I'm teaching my students 30 different handouts worth of material, but it's consistently only quizzing them on 6 or 7 of those handouts, it's missing a whole lot of material. So the solution I found for this was a bit odd, is that I made sure in the capabilities that I had the code interpreter and data analysis turned on. So the code interpreter allows ChatGPT to run Python code within its interface. And then in the instructions, rather than a generic instruction to just choose the topics at random, I said, pick 5 sections of the course material at random from the uploaded course material. To do this, run a short Python code to randomly choose 5 of the handouts at random from all those handouts that match the student's request. Tell the student what handout you've chosen at random. And in other applications, when I've been playing around with ChatGPT, I'll sometimes do this as pages. So if there's a textbook of multiple hundred pages, I'll say, choose 5 pages at random to quiz the student. And I find this actually genuinely randomizes things because it's actually running Python code to randomize it in a way that just generically asking ChatGPT to randomize something does not. I then include some generic instructions about asking true, false, or multiple choice questions, making sure that the alternatives for multiple choice questions are legitimate. And then I say at the end of every question, tell the student how many questions they've gotten right and wrong so far. And this is one of those weird things about ChatGPT. I think it was Ethan Mollick, who's done a lot of writing on this, is referred to as sort of thinking about AI as almost like an alien intelligence, that there's some things that it's very good at and some things that it's very bad at. Quite late in this process of developing this QuizBot, it was doing a really good job of asking questions. It was randomizing the material that it was asking students. The multiple choice questions were worded well. They were plausible alternatives. But then at the very end of the quiz, when it would tell people how many questions you got right and how many questions you got wrong, it wouldn't tabulate them correctly. Like it seemed to not be able to count to 5 or count to 10. And the only way that I was able to fix that is that after every question, it kind of keeps track as it goes. And this is one of the weird things I think as well about ChatGPT, where it doesn't really have a working memory. Its working memory is what it writes down. So if you want ChatGPT to do something, you kind of almost need it to say it out loud so that it's got a record in the chat. And I found that if it kept track, after question 1, this is how many you got right, this is how many you got wrong. After question 2, this is how many you got right, this is how many you got wrong. At the end of those 5 questions, it was able to tabulate a final score. But if I just asked it at the very end to tabulate a final score, it seemed to not be able to do it. It would be off by 2 or 3. Just one of those weird things that you don't kind of discover until you've been playing around with it a lot. But that seems to kind of fix the problem. If it's keeping a running score of the quiz, it'll do a pretty good job. And then a lot of this other language is just sort of generic language. I think some of it I took from Ethan Mollick's guidance about tutor bots and stuff like that, just being helpful, being friendly, being supportive, stuff like that. And then you put that all together and it does a pretty good job. You say, quiz me on the course materials. Does that searching my knowledge. Again, remember that it has today's date, and then it looks at the syllabus and it does a correct job of saying, these are all the topics that have been covered before April 15th, 2025. It summarizes them, so you kind of have a good idea of what you're having to do. It even makes a note here about, a recent assignment that you had to submit. And then you can say, quiz me on the material from the past 3 weeks, quiz me on everything covered in the course so far, or quiz me on a specific topic. I'm going to say, quiz me on everything covered in the course so far. And you'll see here that it's doing this analyzing step, and it's actually running Python code. And so it pulls up all the handouts that are relevant to what's been covered so far. And interestingly, it's smart enough to be able to associate the right handouts with the right topics, even though the way the topics are written in the syllabus is not always quite the same, right? So, it's similar, but something like finding Creative Commons licensed photos, basic journalist math, Freedom of Information and Access Request, Part 1, Part 2, it matches those with the correct handouts, which are in that separate Word document. And then it randomly selects 5 of them and it asks the quiz questions based on that. Now this will not show up unless you click on this, so your students don't need to worry what's going on in the background. They don't need to be intimidated by the fact there's weird Python code happening there. But it says I'm going to ask you about journalist math, search tips, Canly, stats can data, and it starts asking these questions. And this, for example, is a question about how to calculate percentage change, and it's expressed in the way that I tell it to my students, which is that you take the new number minus the old number, divide it by the old number. So I can answer that question. Right, it says great job. And then the nice thing here, and this is part of the instruction set, it then says you should explain a little bit more about the topic, and you should say, where in the handouts that material comes from. If you're doing a Google search for climate change statistics, what would be the best option here? If you select the wrong one, right, it says not quite, but then it doesn't just say wrong, right? It explains, right? If you want to search the exact phrase, this is what you do, right? This is what an asterisk does, right? If you're copying and pasting text. And I can tell you that these are all very specific things that I talk about in my handouts. They're not generic questions about citizen journalism. They're not generic questions about journalistic research. And that's a function of finding the right prompting language that really tells ChatGPT, make sure you're basing this on the course documents. And then again, I think, much as with the tutor bot, I think requiring it to say after the end of each question which handout the information comes from also helps kind of reinforce to ChatGPT the importance of anchoring everything in the course materials. So as we discussed, once you've created your custom GPT, you can decide how you want to share it. You can make it accessible only to yourself. You can put it in the GPT store if you want anyone on the internet to be able to find it and play around with it. If you do that, you have to sort of say what category it's in, education, productivity, and stuff like that. But for most teaching purposes, you want to just use the anyone with the link, and then you can share that link on your course website. You can email it to your students, obviously, and they can then access it using the free version of ChatGPT. One little thing in terms of sort of getting a sense of how your students are using these tools that you've created. At Kwantlen, we use Moodle. And I, was quite excited about this. So I created this little thing on the course website about, hey, try out the new JRNL 3165 tutor bot, explaining that it's still a work in progress, all that kind of stuff. And then I put a little link in here, all you need to do to give it a try. And then they clicked on it like that. I only realized afterwards that because this was a little text box and the links to the custom ChatGPT were within the text box, there was actually no way to monitor using the activity logs on my course website whether students clicked on it or not. So in my second semester teaching the class and playing around with this, I had the exact same language, but I created a separate link up here. Click here for the JRNL 3165 tutor bot. And because this is a separate resource in the course, I can measure like how many students click on it, things like that, which is helpful to get a sense of, are students finding this helpful or not. The other advice I would have in terms of monitoring how this works for your students is when I started playing around with these tutor bots and these quiz bots, I would often ask in class, hey, like who's used this? Was it helpful? And it was just crickets, right? Students weren't saying anything at all. And I started to kind of get worried. I'm like, well, maybe I'm really excited about the possibilities of these custom GPTs, but my students kind of think it's useless, right? And I was getting a bit discouraged. And then at the end of the semester, I had an anonymous Google Forms survey where I asked students to give me feedback, like, hey, did you use this bot? If so, was it helpful? Was it not helpful? Stuff like that. And I gave them some time in class to fill out the survey. And I had other questions about the course as well. And I was really shocked to find out that while virtually no students in class would admit that they were using it, about half the students had used it, and a lot of them had found it really, really helpful. So in terms of getting a sense of, whether these quiz bots and tutor bots are useful for your students, I highly recommend anonymous surveys. And I think the reason for the discrepancy there is that because ChatGPT has become such a huge cheating tool, even if you tell students, hey, I want you to use ChatGPT, hey, I've created this special version of ChatGPT just for you to help you study, they're reluctant to admit that they've ever even heard of ChatGPT. There's such a stigma around it, that even under the conditions of you being the biggest advocate and evangelist for ChatGPT and what it can do and how it can be a helpful, beneficial, ethical thing that will help them in their learning, they will just clam up and they won't want to talk about it. But if you give them an anonymous space to discuss it, they'll actually give you some really interesting feedback, and it can be quite helpful. So if you're really trying to figure out if your students are using it, these kind of passive tracking things where you can see are students clicking on it or not are helpful, and then giving them anonymous surveys to give you that kind of more fine-grained feedback. And that more fine-grained feedback is helpful because, in terms of finding out it was useful for this, it wasn't useful for this. It was through some of that initial feedback that I learned that on the QuizBot, students were often getting the same questions over and over again, and that's when I had to tweak some of the language around that. So I think I would highly recommend anonymous surveys as a way of figuring out, what your students think of these tools and how you can improve them. So I'm excited about the possibility of ChatGPT as a learning aid to allow us to create tutor bots and quiz bots that are really anchored in our course materials and can help our students understand course materials, prepare for tests, test their own knowledge. But I do need to put a few warnings on here because some really weird stuff happened with ChatGPT over the last month and a half or so, which gave me pause and which I think should give you pause as well. So the first one is that every so often I would test out these tutor bots, ask them the same 3 or 4 questions just to make sure everything was working okay. And about a month and a half ago, I noticed it was acting a little bit weird. It was still searching the course materials on the tutor bot, but it was giving answers that just weren't quite as good. And so this is an example from a few weeks ago where I said, which download option is best for StatsCan data. And as we've already established, when the bot is working properly, it very clearly gives me this: there's download as displayed, or there's downloads for database loading, and these are the pros and cons of each. But it instead gave me this weird answer, which was rooted in the course materials, because in addition to the handouts, I'd also uploaded some of my assignments, but it was a bit more generic. It was talking about, in general, you want to choose Excel files or CSV files, and you want to make sure you don't use third-party data sites like Kaggle. But what it was doing is it was taking some general advice about data sets that I had from one of my assignments, and it wasn't finding that specific advice about Statistics Canada data sets that was in a separate handout on Statistics Canada. So it was a kind of a weird thing where it was doing a search of the course materials, but it was a little bit lazy. It was sort of finding the first thing it came across and going with that as opposed to digging a little bit deeper. And I found this sort of with several questions where it was giving me an answer that was okay, but not quite right, not quite as in-depth, not quite as specific and precise as it had been in the past. What I found is that I was able to kind of tweak the language a little bit. I just sort of made it even clearer in my instructions that I wanted it to find material in the course materials. I wanted to find it the best material that it could to answer the question. And I was able to get it back to the way it was working before. As best I can tell about what happened here is that there was some sort of change in the overall model for ChatGPT that somehow made the custom GPT not act quite as well. But I was able to tweak it a little bit and get it working pretty well. Much more worrying was 2 or 3 weeks ago. I actually had a couple of students in my data visualization class that said, I tried out your tutor bot and it was giving me advice that just seemed really strange. Like, it was telling me there were settings in one of our software tools and I couldn't see those settings, and sometimes the responses seemed almost kind of incoherent. I tested out those same questions with my newly improved, tweaked tutor bot, and it seemed to be working fine. And then it occurred to me, I wonder if the experience is different for free users of ChatGPT. And this is a general piece of advice which I think you really want to think about, which is that sometimes free ChatGPT works the same as paid ChatGPT. Sometimes it doesn't. And so what I would recommend is, if you're creating these tutor bots yourself, you're going to need to have a paid version of ChatGPT. But just use a separate email address, a burner email address, and set up a free version of ChatGPT as well, so that you can see what your students are seeing when they use the free version of ChatGPT. And when I did that, and I asked it some basic questions that I always ask it to test the tutor bot, I was a little bit appalled because I got this. I said, in response to the question, which download option is best for StatsCan data, and this is using the free version of ChatGPT, the answer that it gave me was the JRNL 3165 course materials explain the importance of color in data visualization and discuss the difference between categorical, sequential, and diverging color schemes. And it would then provide me direct quotes from the course materials that do not exist. It was hallucinating these direct quotes from the course materials. And this is just one example, but there were several others where I would ask it a question. The answer would have nothing to do with my question, and the answers it was giving did not seem to be at all linked to the course materials. Now, weirdly, it was giving me that little searching the knowledge base. So it wasn't that it was just basing it on general knowledge from its training data set. It was just acting in a very, very strange, weird way and giving me very, very different answers than on the paid version of ChatGPT. As best as I can tell, this was a temporary problem that was created by, most likely, the kind of viral sensation that was created by the new image generator that ChatGPT launched in the spring of 2025. I don't know when you're going to be watching this, but people were uploading images of themselves and having them look like Miyazaki cartoons or things like that, like just playing around with it. It was a really big improvement on their image generator, and people were just using it. I think Sam Altman of OpenAI actually said it was melting their servers. And I think what happened is, to be able to meet that demand for the image generator, in other aspects of ChatGPT, they were, and this is all speculation on my part, but they were throttling the free users in other ways. And this was one of the impacts of that, is that some of the custom GPTs were not working optimally for free users, even though they were still working okay for paid users. So the paid users, it was still, whether it's token size or whatever compute power that is needed for these custom GPTs, they were getting the full meal deal. But somehow the free users were kind of getting throttled in a weird way that resulted in responses that were suboptimal, incoherent, in some cases, increased the risk of hallucination. Now, the good news is, and good news for me, because I was about to record this video and I was like, wow, just as I'm about to record the video, the entire thing has fallen apart. Within a couple of weeks, it was working again, right? And working just as well as it had worked before. And I'm cautiously optimistic that it was just a weird quirk to do with demand on their servers in other areas, and it made it kind of go haywire for a while. That said, ChatGPT will probably come up with other features that go viral and put demands on their servers and might lead directly or indirectly to other aspects of the service being throttled. So I think the main takeaway here is that I think there's an enormous potential with ChatGPT to create these custom GPT tools that can assist our students. But I think you need to be constantly monitoring them from your own account, and then from a free account that you're sort of have your 4 or 5 or 6 testing questions, making sure that they're answering in the way that they should. And if they don't, maybe you got to take the site offline for a while things stabilize. As I say, it just sort of all of a sudden started working again a couple weeks later. But it was a bit of a shock to see something that had been working so well all of a sudden not just work poorly, but work incoherently. One other thing to keep in mind here is that when you're playing around with your prompts and trying to figure out how to improve them, a very natural instinct would be to take your instructions here. And I did this, when I was trying to figure out how to improve them, and go into ChatGPT and say, can you give me some advice on how to improve this prompt for a custom GPT tutor bot, right? Paste it in. This seems like what ChatGPT is meant for, right? Every time I have done this and I have taken ChatGPT's advice, my tutor bots or quiz bots have gotten worse. So weirdly, the one thing that ChatGPT seems to be really, really bad at is helping you use ChatGPT. And I think there's actually a very logical reason for this. Plain vanilla ChatGPT is based on a training data set, which is basically the internet. And there's always a bit of a delay, right? And sometimes ChatGPT will flag this for you, right? Like this is, based on my knowledge base cutoff is September of 2024 or February of 2025, but it's always a bit in the past. It's just the way that the training of the AI models work. And when you're having a problem with your custom GPT, especially if it's one that's been introduced by a recent change to the model, the one thing that is not in ChatGPT's training data set is that model, right? Is people's experience working with that new model, right? So there's this weird, counterintuitive thing that one of ChatGPT's biggest blind spots is ChatGPT itself. And it's so counterintuitive because you sort of think like ChatGPT more than anyone should be able to tell me how to work with ChatGPT, but it's actually not the case. It's the opposite. It's the one thing that it can't do very well. There is, though, a workaround for this, is not to just ask ChatGPT for help, but to click on this little web search button and say something more specifically like search recent discussion forums, Reddit posts, and blog posts over the past year from people who have experience using custom GPTs in ChatGPT. Based on what you find, can you give me some advice on how to improve this prompt for a custom GPT tutor bot? And I found when I was having that one little problem with even the paid version of ChatGPT not quite giving proper answers, this type of prompt actually worked quite well, because it wasn't trying to just base it on ChatGPT's general training data set. It was going out into recent discussion forums, surfacing relevant examples of people that had had similar challenges to myself, and giving me good advice. So ChatGPT can be helpful in tweaking your prompts, but you really need to make sure that you're directing it to search recent discussion forums and things like that, because otherwise you're going to get something that is very confident. I mean, ChatGPT is always very confident in telling you how to improve it, but will actually often be giving you advice that makes your prompts worse. Another good reason to get a free account for ChatGPT is so that you have a better sense of what using your custom bot is like for your students, because most of your students will only have free ChatGPT accounts. And the biggest annoyance at the moment is that the free version of ChatGPT rate limits the use of custom GPT. So you can only use them for a certain amount of time before you're locked out, and you need to wait a certain amount of time to use it again. In my experience, this rate limit often kicks in kind of for quizzes after maybe about 1.5 5-question quizzes. So not that much. For the tutor bot, 5 or 6 questions. And then often you have to wait several hours before you can use it again. It's not a deal breaker, I don't think, because maybe students just want to do the odd 5-question quiz and they'll maybe do one a day and it's just fine. For the tutor bot, they may just have one question they want answered, and then they won't ask another question for several days, and so it's fine. But you do need to be aware that's going to be an annoyance for your students, and certainly in the feedback that I've received, it's one of the key things they say they don't like about it is that they can't use it very much. I don't think this is a deal breaker because they can still use it. And I do think what we're noticing in the development of AI is the costs of AI computing power are coming down. The functionality of free accounts is going up. So a lot of the new features that used to be kind of gated for only the paid users, they are available to free users in some limited sense. So my hope is that the kind of the rate limit, the rates that will be limited will get bigger and bigger, and it'll become less of an issue for students. But it's good to be aware of that and to sort of play around with those tools so that you have a good sense of what your students' experience is going to be like. So to wrap up, at the moment, based on my experimenting with ChatGPT over the last several months, I think tutor bots and quiz bots are the most obvious application for custom GPTs that can be really helpful for students. I think I've stumbled across prompt language that works pretty well for both, and I'll share that in the discussion text below this video. You should just be able to take that, tweak it a little bit for your own course, upload your course materials, and it should work pretty well. And then you can just sort of play around with it and through trial and error to get it to work even better for you. Two areas that I want to talk about. One is I've been talking a lot about ChatGPT, the paid version of ChatGPT. There are other alternatives. Gemini, which is Google's AI tool, has something called GEMS. And they work very, very similar to custom GPTs, right? You give it a name, right? JNRL 3651 TutorBot. You can upload knowledge files here, and then you can give it custom instructions. I've played around with this with basically the same kind of instructions that I gave ChatGPT, the same knowledge files, and the responses were not identical, but pretty similar and pretty similarly reliable. The biggest downside to gems is at the moment you cannot share them, right? So the upside is you can build them with a free account. I have not paid for Gemini, and I can create gems, and so it's a good sort of testing bed, but you can't easily share them with other people. There's been talk that Google will open up that functionality. I think if it does, it'll create a nice opportunity for people to experiment with these kind of applications without having to pay for an AI service. While I think that tutorbots and quizbots are the most obvious application for custom GPTs in education, I think there are other interesting creative things that can be done here, and I've started to play around with some other ideas as well. One of them is an assignment feedback bot, where students can submit an early draft of an assignment and get some initial feedback from the custom GPT on things they might want to think about or things that they could improve. That's based on uploading the assignment instructions, some example assignments, some general feedback and marking rubrics and things like that. You got to be careful, obviously, and this sort of gets near to my own comfort level with these. You don't want to have a GPT that is doing the assignment for the student. But we have tutoring services at our university, as do most universities, where this idea of getting something done early, getting some initial feedback can be quite helpful. And I think there's some potentials there to, again, help students to get better at their own work as opposed to having ChatGPT do the work for them. There's other kind of fun things that you could do, like if you're teaching a history class, you could play around with trying to create a custom GPT that acts like Winston Churchill and allows your students to talk to Winston Churchill about World War II and things like that. But I think the real sort of fundamental idea here is just using the combination of the instruction set and your own course materials to kind of create a version of ChatGPT that's more specifically tailor-made for your students, your class, than generic ChatGPT. And I do think, and I don't want to be Pollyanna-ish here, because I do know that the issue of cheating with generative AI is very real. But I think the model of ignoring AI in our classes, pretending that it doesn't exist, continuing on as if nothing's changed, is not a good approach. Some of this can be dealt with by just having conversations in your class. Like I now often begin classes talking to students very openly about, I'm okay with you using ChatGPT for this. I'm not okay with you using ChatGPT for this. But I think these custom GPTs, can possibly change the conversation a little bit, where we're not ignoring the technology. Our students aren't wondering, why are you pretending that ChatGPT doesn't exist? But we're saying, hey, yeah, I think this can actually be useful and assist your learning in this way, and I'm gonna actually support that and create versions of ChatGPT that will make your learning better. But I'm still not okay, and you shouldn't be okay with replacing your own thought process with ChatGPT. That just typing in an assignment into ChatGPT and copying and pasting the result, that's still not okay. You still don't learn anything there. But there are ways that we think ChatGPT can be applied more productively. So hopefully this has been helpful. I'd love to know how you're using ChatGPT in the classroom. Please put it in the comments. And if you have feedback on this video, if you found it helpful, if you've got questions about working with ChatGPT in an education setting, please put it in the comments. Either I or sometimes someone else will chime in with their thoughts. But that's it for now. Again, thank you so much to KPU for providing me some space to work with this tool and to think about how it can be applied to education. That's all for now.